Doki Doki Literature Club was an astounding success for the indie developer team Team Salvato in 2017. The game amassed a huge audience and a wave of popularity when it was released that it became part of the larger conversation in the video game community. Visual novels themselves are already pretty niche in the gaming sphere, so how did this cutesy anime dating sim become so popular? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Despite its appearances, it's a terrifying psychological horror game. It was popularized by how exactly horrifying the overall game was to play. It managed to be surprisingly scary and unnerving. The interesting question is how a cute game like this manages to do this, especially on a large enough scale to garner a significant amount of attention from the gaming community. While people might be quick to dismiss the reasoning as simply, it breaks the fourth wall a lot, or it has a scary soundtrack, I believe the answer is a bit more nuanced than that. I believe that the game itself is very meticulously crafted by using its own genre conventions as a game to horrify its players. It fundamentally deconstructs and destroys its own identity as a visual novel to accomplish this. Before tackling the specifics on how the game deconstructs itself to its own advantage, it's important to point out that the game itself is actively working to undermine and destroy the player's immersion. In essence, the game is actively trying to disturb, if not entirely shatter, the aesthetic illusion of the game. Aesthetic illusion is a very interesting concept that was talked about extensively by Werner in his research. He explains that aesthetic illusion is a pleasurable mental state that is present during the reception of narrative fiction. It involves being both emotionally and imaginatively immersed into another represented world. It encompasses a dual nature that is always present. The state from within refers to mental simulation, which leads to immersion, and from without refers to the awareness of the text itself, leading to distance. While both are present when experiencing a narrative, the mental simulation will often operate in the forefront, while the awareness of the text will be left in the background. When the roles are reversed and the awareness of the text is greater than the mental simulation, it will result in increased distance and undermines immersion. While Doki Doki Literature Club seems to uphold the aesthetic illusion for the first act of the game, as the game progresses, it becomes very clear that it becomes shattered by later acts of the game. It grows to the point where the awareness of the text is much greater than the mental simulation offered by the game. This is to say that the awareness of the text has overridden the mental simulation given to the player by the game. This is done through obvious methods like the increased use of irregular or weird effects added to the music, or the breaking of the fourth wall, but also encompasses other key aspects of the gameplay itself, such as the way that the game can forcibly close itself, can delete your save files, or eventually forces you to mess with the game's files to complete the story. These elements bring awareness to the player not only about the fact that they are playing a game, but also that they are looking at a game. They're completely aware of the text in question, and total immersion into the world of the game becomes impossible. This destruction of aesthetic illusion within the game is a key aspect in the way that this game is able to horrify its players. It acts as a way to force the player to constantly dip in and out of the mental simulation and mess with a divide that should usually exist. They are never fully allowed to immerse themselves into the game's world, resulting in the realization and awareness of the game as a game, and subsequently their own roles as players who influence the outcome of the story. This is a necessity for Doki Doki Literature Club, as it uses the state alongside the deconstruction and destruction of the genre conventions to make the player feel both helpless and terrified of what is happening in the game. One of the most fundamental systems present in any visual novel is the save and load functions. These functions are absolutely fundamental to any visual novel regardless of the genre. They are important because they allow you to save your progress and allow you to go back and fix the mistakes that you might have made in your playthrough. Regardless of how linear a visual novel usually is, most will still have multiple endings that the player can get. Some of these endings may be undesirable for the player, so the use of the save and load systems works as a way to go back and fix mistakes that they may have made in the game. These two systems are also fundamentally important for the players who want to fully complete the game in its multiple paths. If this is the case, then what are the function of these systems in Doki Doki Literature Club? Well, the function of these systems seems to be exactly the same as any other visual novel within the first act. They work as you would expect them to. Saving and loading will act as a way to save your progress and as a way to give yourself insurance just in case anything goes wrong. But this is the game's way of lowering your guard. The truth about the loading and saving functionality of this game is that both functions are pointless in every sense of the word. No matter what path you take, you will eventually come to see your childhood friend Sayuri kill herself. Upon reaching this point, your previous saves and loads become corrupted, as the character file for Sayuri is gone. If you try to reload one of these files, the game will state that Sayori's file is deleted and the game will forcibly close itself and restart. All of your saves at this point will have been deleted by the game. You then restart the game without Sayori ever having been part of the literature club. While these functions may have seemed normal at the start, the true purpose of these functions is to express to the player that the mistakes that are made are permanent, and that the things that will happen within the confines of the game cannot be avoided. Given the usual conventions of the save and load functions of visual novels, this idea is absolutely terrifying. It makes the experience feel more desperate for the player because they cannot rely on one of the core features that they usually would be able to. They feel helpless because now they have to play through the rest of the game with the guilt of letting Sayori die without being able to do anything about it. They cannot fix anything that they mess up on. This is a fantastic way to deconstruct and repurpose one of the most important functions of visual novels. Sound is a vital and foundational part of any game, regardless of genre. It can help fill in empty spaces, work in tandem with the visuals to tell the story, or it can help express certain emotions or themes within the game. Even with this in mind, I would argue that for visual novels, it is more fundamental as an aspect of immersion, as visual novels are quite limited by their inherent form. This is not to say that visual novels can't use aspects from other games such as animated cutscenes or other elements of gameplay, but the general form is heavily based on the limitations of both still sprites and text. As such, the importance of sound for immersion is quite a bit higher than other games where the visuals themselves may be enough to hook you in. Considering that it is a fundamental aspect of visual novels, how does Doki Doki Literature Club twist the usual conventions of sound in visual novels? Similar to what I was just talking about with the save and load functions of visual novels, the sound seems to function normally within the first act of the game, but later on its true purpose becomes clear and it is vastly different. In the first act of the game, the main theme, Doki Doki Literature Club, acts as an immersive gateway into the game and works to emphasize the upbeat and cutesy vibe of the visual novel through its upbeat and bright melody. This is further emphasized by the fact that there is no direct dialogue to be heard between the characters, so the musical element of this game becomes much more impactful than normal. However, as soon as Sayori dies, the purpose of sound in the game changes instantly. Heard through the absurdly distorted version of the same cheery main theme, the theme that plays when Sayori dies completely repurposes the use of music for the rest of the game. Sayonara is a distorted and transformed version of the main theme, with several notes being altered by half steps and certain notes being distorted completely. This causes a lot of dissonance and non-linearity within the music that feels very uneasy. It marks two important things for the game moving forward. One, the sound will work against your immersion into the game as the player. The game will sporadically and randomly add distortions to the music and constantly disengage you from the text. 2. The sound will work to unnerve you through the corruption of all the normal music you have heard until this point. Sarah Bowden writes about the non-linearity of sound within Doki Doki Literature Club and notes that Sayonara reflects and indicates the destruction of the normal through the tonal disruptions of the melody. The dissonance within the theme greatly intensifies the horror of Sayori's death. She goes on to say that the main theme and future iterations, namely Sayonara and Your Reality, rely on the non-linearity of sound and the perversion of the melody to create a sense of unease for the players. Ultimately, I believe that the purpose of sound within the game is not apparent from the start of the game. Rather, its true purpose is to disengage and disrupt the player's experience with the game and make them feel uneasy through the use of distortions, dissonance, and non-linearity, making the players dread playing through the rest of the game. I believe that Doki Doki Literature Club is a very well-crafted psychological horror game because it distorts the idea of the aesthetic illusion, which makes it hard for the player to fully immerse into the game. They become aware of the fact that they are players who will influence the outcome of the game, which is absolutely terrifying given the scope of the game. This is further emphasized by both the uselessness of the fundamental save and load systems and the growing distortions of the music. In short, Doki Doki Literature Club does a great job at deconstructing and manipulating itself as a visual novel game to terrify its players.